Now to the Anzac ceremonies, which used to be about Anzac Day. Now, as with any national day, those with an agenda will appropriate them, however subtly, for their own purposes. Take, for example, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his address at the dawn service in Canberra this week.
Yet it must be acknowledged that we have not always honoured those who have fought in our name as well as we should. Likewise, we must acknowledge the truth that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who donned the khaki fought harder for Australia than Australia was sometimes willing to fight for them. Yet we learn and we keep taking steps forward together.
And what steps would they be? Andrew Bolt spotted this for what it was.
Then the Prime Minister himself used his dawn service speech in Canberra to, in a sense, campaign for his voice to Parliament, his Aboriginal-only advisory Parliament that he put to a referendum this year. He actually dragged in more race politics, accusing his country of stabbing soldiers with Aboriginal ancestry in the back.
However, the rest of the media happily broadcast the Prime Minister's comments around the nation without much scrutiny. And many in the media also decided to put a heavy Indigenous focus on Anzac Day. We spotted articles on the West Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, and of course the ABC falling for that trap and instead of celebrating our diggers, making the day all about race. Now, all of those people are entitled to their views, but the focus was certainly being pulled away from the core purpose of Anzac Day and into conversations about intergenerational trauma of displaced Indigenous people.
And Taylor, as we think about Anzac Day, we know that there is still not a commemoration in the War Memorial that recognises the frontier wars and the wars that First Nations people fought on this land against people invading First Nations land. How do you reflect on this and the talk of war with the legacy of conflict in our own country?
It doesn't stop just at one generation. You know, it flows on and on and on. Intergenerational trauma is a real thing and it's alive and well.
And on ABC Breakfast, co-host Michael Rowland was also in activist mode.
Hey, I know the War Memorial is moving to acknowledge the frontier wars with that new exhibition being built as part of the renovations of the War Memorial. Is it time, though, Matt Anderson, to acknowledge the frontier wars as part of the dawn services and the Anzac Day marches?
Well, Daisy, what are your thoughts? Time and place for the debate. Do you think it was appropriate for journalists to put their campaigns into the Anzac Day coverage?
You know what, I really don't. And as we've all said, everyone is entitled to their opinion, to say what they want. But the thing about Anzac Day is that, I hate to sound cliched here, but it's true, that should be a day that unites all Australians. It really should, you know, for a common cause. We can all agree that the diggers fought hard and in terrible conditions and should absolutely be honoured. By all means, honour the Indigenous soldiers. That's perfectly fine. That's another issue. But why would you inject that into all of the coverage? That is not what Anzac Day should be about. It's an interesting shift this year, isn't it, that this has happened? I think perhaps it is, strategically motivated in the case of Albo because of the Voice campaign. It could be, opportunistic, in a debate sense in the case of Stan Grant. I think perhaps these outlets are maybe worried about the increasingly agitating racial activists like Lydia Thorpe and people who think like her, who are going to jump on these outlets perhaps for not discussing the issue of Indigenous people. I mean, you never know. They're pretty another group of people that are very angry, are woke racial activists. But either way, I thought it was inappropriate.
Too scared of criticism if they don't. Caroline, what are your thoughts?
Look, off the back of what Daisy said, I think we should acknowledge our Indigenous Australians on Anzac Day. And we often hear of great personal stories on Anzac Day. So we do hear about particular people. We hear about the particular contribution of women during wartime, of mothers, of personal suffering, of a whole range of stories. Anzac Day, that is the wonderful thing, I suppose, about Anzac Day is it's this great opportunity to reflect and tell stories, and all different sorts of stories of what ordinary people did but were extraordinary in their service of this country. That being said, that there can be achieved without the emotional blackmail. We get enough emotional blackmail every other day of the year. So if they could just park it for the one day, that would be lovely.
Well said, Caroline.